As President Trump's tariffs take direct aim at Ontario's workers and create chaos and uncertainty for businesses, our government is delivering on our plan to protect Ontario. We may not be able to control President Trump, but what we can control, the decisions we make here in Ontario and Canada.
This morning in Toronto, the political and economic narrative of North America was fundamentally rewritten. What began as a highly anticipated domestic infrastructure announcement rapidly evolved into a definitive geopolitical statement against unilateral economic disruption. For generations, the baseline assumption of the global market was that the Canadian economy would remain permanently tethered to the priorities of the United States. That integration, once universally viewed as an unbreakable asset and a stable anchor, is now being treated by provincial and federal policymakers as a critical vulnerability. The dynamic between the continent's two largest trading partners has experienced a structural evolution. The response from Canadian leadership is not panic, nor is it a desperate plea for exemptions from an erratic superpower. The response is a calculated, systematic pivot toward domestic self-reliance and the creation of absolute economic optionality. While Donald Trump talks unilateral disruption, Mark Carney engineers systemic resilience. To fully grasp the magnitude of this shift, we must look at the historical precedent. Traditionally, when Washington threatened tariffs or closed its markets, Ottawa's default posture was diplomatic negotiation, a reliance on the established network of shared supply chains. But the rules of engagement have changed. When the world's largest economy becomes a volatile and unpredictable partner, maintaining the status quo is a recipe for economic paralysis. The current administration has recognized that true leverage does not come from asking for favorable trade terms. It comes from building an internal market so robust that external pressure loses its efficacy. This realignment requires unprecedented coordination. It requires putting aside partisan differences to establish a unified front that can withstand external shocks. How do you protect a domestic market from an erratic superpower? You listen to the consensus emerging across all levels of Canadian leadership, recognizing that the era of reliable partnership with Washington requires a new domestic insurance policy.
We may not be able to control President Trump, but what we can control, the decisions we make here in Ontario and Canada. By building the most competitive, resilient, and self-reliant economy in the G7. To protect Ontario, we're investing in our world-class workers, our businesses, and our infrastructure. Ontario is leading the country when it comes to breaking down internal trade barriers, so we can unlock more than $200 billion in new economic activity. Will add roughly about 4 to 6% to our GDP across the country. We're building new pipelines, rail lines, airports, seaports, so we can find new trading partners and rely less on old ones.
That line changes everything. This is no longer just about building transit networks or funding municipal housing projects. It is a direct, public acknowledgement that the old bilateral relationship is fundamentally broken, and that a new foundation must be poured. To understand the sheer scale of this economic realignment, we have to look closely at the capital moving across the table and the mechanisms being deployed. Today's unprecedented $8.8 billion agreement between Ottawa and Ontario is ostensibly focused on cutting development charges to accelerate the construction of homes and the expansion of critical transit corridors. But when you examine the mechanics of this deal through a geopolitical lens, it reveals a much deeper strategy. This is a massive, highly coordinated injection of state capital designed to stimulate internal growth that is entirely insulated from cross-border supply chain volatility. The underlying strategy is incredibly clear. If Washington intends to disrupt the free flow of goods, capital, and labor across the border, Canada will generate its own economic gravity. This is how a modern state creates predictability in a sea of global instability. By investing billions into local infrastructure, heavy transit corridors, and massive residential developments. Ottawa is engineering a captive domestic boom. This boom does not rely on foreign approval, foreign investment, or foreign political stability. They are laying the groundwork for a decade of sustainable, predictable growth. The government understands that true power and leverage on the global stage always begins with absolute stability and economic momentum at home. But here is where the story becomes geopolitically significant for American observers, particularly those in the manufacturing and engineering sectors who are watching Canadian capital dry up before their eyes.
Every project, from housing to public infrastructure, supports and needs workers in the skilled trades and in the Canadian materials and manufacturing, and they will be supported by our Buy Canada policy, because it's not just what we build, it's how we build. Inclusively, in full partnership with First Nations, Indigenous, Inuit, and Métis. We'll build in solidarity with workers, creating good union jobs. We'll build sustainably, like here at the Stella, because reducing emissions isn't just a moral duty, it's an economic imperative. And above all, we will build Canadian, becoming our own best customer. Canadians have given us a mandate to build a stronger country, a country where Canadians are empowered with more opportunities that help them get ahead, and safer communities and homes they can afford. That's the foundation on which Canadians build their lives, how they want it, where they want it. So by building smart, building Canadian, building now, we're building Ontario strong and Canada strong.
This is code. Becoming our own best customer is a polite, diplomatic translation for ending reliance on American contractors, American suppliers, and American engineering firms. The phrase, Buy Canada, is not merely a political slogan dusted off for a press conference, it is a structural transformation of the Canadian procurement economy. For years, American firms have enjoyed highly lucrative access to Canadian public infrastructure spending, benefiting from the seamless integration of the North American market. That era of easy, undisputed access is rapidly coming to a close. Mark Carney is systematically redirecting billions of taxpayer dollars inward, ensuring that the economic multiplier effect stays strictly within the country's borders. Leverage. That's what this is about. Economic leverage, domestic leverage, geopolitical leverage. When a government controls the capital, dictates the sourcing of the materials, and secures the labor force, it naturally insulates its broader economy from external tariff threats. The old world is gone. The old dependencies are gone. The old comfort zone is gone. Executing this level of transformation requires absolute, unshakable alignment between the federal government and the provinces. Historically, getting Ottawa and Ontario to agree on strict, unified procurement mandates has been a logistical nightmare and a political challenge fraught with regional friction. Yet, the volatile trade threats emanating from the current U.S. administration have inadvertently forged an unprecedented political coalition. We are witnessing a Liberal Prime Minister, a Conservative Premier, and a Progressive Mayor speaking with one unified voice regarding the necessity of domestic economic security and industrial independence. This raises a fundamental question for policymakers and global markets watching this unfold. Will the provinces actually enforce this inward pivot? Or is this just federal rhetoric designed to temporarily signal strength during a tense news cycle?
And of course, as we build these transformational projects, they will be subject to our Buy Canada and Buy Ontario policies so that Ontario tax dollars support Ontario workers. That's the message to the architects and the engineers. We have to make sure we buy Ontario or Canadian. This agreement is historic, and it's only possible because all three levels of government have come together as a united Team Canada to make it happen. Together, we're getting shovels in the ground on hundreds of thousands of new homes and making homes more affordable. Together, we're building transit projects that will get people out of gridlock, keep hundreds of thousands of workers on the jobs, job and support growing communities. Together, we're lowering taxes and making life more affordable so we can protect Ontario and Canada by building the most competitive, resilient, and self-reliant economy in the G7. And together, we will continue protecting workers and families in every corner of this province, which is the best province, the best country in the entire world.
That is not commentary. That is positioning. A Conservative premier has officially locked arms with Ottawa to legally and structurally wall off the Canadian public procurement market from the United States. We are currently witnessing a historic realignment of North American trade dynamics executed with cold efficiency. Consider the sheer volume of this single initiative. $8.8 billion deployed into a single province, backed by stringent local purchasing mandates. For Canada, this number represents a massive macroeconomic stabilization mechanism. It guarantees a decade of domestic industrial activity, sustained job creation, and municipal growth, completely regardless of who occupies the Oval Office or what erratic tariffs are threatened on any given morning. For the United States, however, this number represents $8.8 billion in completely lost opportunities. It signifies a closed door to a highly lucrative, historically accessible market that used to be virtually guaranteed for American exporters, steel manufacturers, and engineering firms. Ottawa is proving that resilience is built from the ground up, one contract at a time, bypassing the noise of Washington to focus on tangible domestic output. At the heart of this geopolitical shift is a distinctly human element, one that redefines the concept of national security. The Canadian tradesperson, the steelworker in Hamilton pouring the foundation, the transit engineer in Toronto designing the grid, the heavy equipment operator in the suburbs moving the earth, is no longer dependent on the political mood swings of Washington for their livelihood. They are building their own future, operating within a secure, predictable economic network, and underwritten by a state that has finally decided to unapologetically back its own industrial core. What happened in Toronto today was more than a routine infrastructure funding announcement. It was a defining moment for Canada's economic independence and a blueprint for navigating a fractured global market. If you want sharp, fearless analysis of how Canada is navigating global pressure while expanding its economic power, this is the channel for you. We break down the strategy behind the speeches, the leverage behind the deals, and the leadership behind the headlines. Mark Carney isn't just reacting to events. He's reshaping Canada's global position in real time. Subscribe to Canada SR, turn on notifications, and stay ahead of the geopolitical shifts defining this decade. And now I want to hear from you. Will this strict Buy Canada infrastructure strategy successfully shield the domestic economy, or will it trigger a deeper, more permanent trade divide with Washington that cannot be easily repaired? Let me know in the comments below.